Walked into, okay? But thank you for being good sports. We've had other visitors, and they've been great sports about doing this with us. And everybody's in here learning maps and learning geography about the New Testament because it's real. Real places, real people at a real time, and this reinforces the reality of it. Yeah, if you haven't grabbed your folder, you can do that. Let's see. Yeah, once you join them, Ray. Yeah. So, and Rachel, I'm going to put you up here with Becca and Daryl and Natalie, number 6, up there. So, we've really been getting our hands dirty the last couple weeks. We put the relief maps in the hallway over here where the coat rack is, near the ladies' room and the windows. So just go down that hall sometime and look at them. They're all looking good. And if you haven't got a good look at them, the dentists are back. Thank you for coming back. That's good. So you didn't leave Andrew, did you? You didn't leave Andrew on some island, did you? You don't know? Okay, all right. That sounds suspicious, but that's okay. But we're glad to have them back. So y'all need to check out those maps because you missed the finishing touches. But tonight's going to be a little bit different. We're actually going to start with the screens. And I'm going to call on Rick to lead us in a prayer. But we're going to be looking at this screen here, and I'll explain what this is about. And so it may be you want to turn your chair around. A lot of folks, let me see here. This is from last week. This is from last week. This is from last week too. You may want to pull your map out of Jerusalem from last week if you want to take some notes on it. If you don't, that's okay, no problem. So, I tell you what, Lydia, will you run up there and join that group? And then Olivia, join up there with Joe, and I'll put you 2 right here, okay? And you 4, sorry. I'll make a little room. And Olivia, you go up there to 7, and you go up there to 6, Lydia. Thank you very much. So you may want to take some notes. I'll explain what this program is, but you may want to move your chair around where you can easily see this screen. We're going to be on this about 15 minutes or more, and so you may want to turn it around to get to the nearest screen. Some of you are in okay shape. Others of you might need to turn around, and if you want to take notes of what I'm going to talk about, you can, and then we're going to do an activity, as we usually do, in creating a map at the table, partly in light of what we've seen so far about Jerusalem. So let's start with prayer. Rick, would you lead us?
Our God and Father, we're indeed thankful to be here this evening. We're thankful for this time we have to consider the world in which your Son lived and walked and taught and did such wonderful works. And help us to realize as we consider these things that these are not myths or fables, but these things truly happen, Father. And we can have confidence in the revelation of your word and what it teaches us. And may we have a greater faith and a greater assurance of the things that you have written as a result of this study, and help us each day to strive to serve you more perfectly and be the people you want us to be. We are thankful for your kind care and compassion toward us, with which out, Father, we would have nothing and be nothing. We're mindful of those who are not able to be here this evening, whatever the reason might be. We pray that their hearts will be yours and they will be directed to you, whatever they might be struggling with or dealing with. The traveling, we pray for their safety. All these things we ask in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Okay, Ray, would you mind hitting those lights to the auditorium, please? I think we got plenty of light coming in. You're okay. If you need to take notes, don't worry. Ken's still in control. I'm coming over here, but I'm not going to push any buttons except the mouse, okay? So Ken's still in charge. So look at the screen. Again, move if you need to move. And what this is, I was looking. I know we promised a free trip to the Bible lands for whoever won the relief map, but we didn't have those funds. So there we go. This is the next best thing. I was looking for something. I knew there would be something out there like this, and sure enough, I found it. Now, full disclosure, you may notice this is actually produced by Brigham Young University scholars. Obvious problems there with their theology. But this is a virtual tour of New Testament Jerusalem based on archaeological evidence. And I looked at other sources to make sure they were basing it on the archaeological evidence, and they did. And this is one of the most accurate things. Matter of fact, they're very restrained. You'll see some maps that say this happened here and there, and it's somewhat speculation. This is a very conservative approach to what things were like, and it's based on a lot of archaeological finds in the last 100 years or even a half century. And so we're going to take this tour together. This is called Virtual New Testament, and it's an app. And so after we do this tonight, you may want to go home and play with it. And those of you who teach classes and kids classes, this really has potential for class activities. So here we go. And hopefully I'll do it in a way that won't cause motion sickness. So what happened there? I lost it. Ken. Where'd it go? There. Okay. It should... There we go. All right. That's an aerial view of Jerusalem. And this is not modern-day Jerusalem. This is a computer model of Jerusalem in the first century. And you can look at those maps I gave you last week. You can look at your atlas. And you'll first of all note those valleys that frame Jerusalem. There's the Hinnom Valley that starts here on the western side of Jerusalem and swings around to the south side. There's the Kidron Valley right here. It's a very deep ravine. And then there's the more shallow but definitely very distinct Tyropoeon Valley that cuts right through Jerusalem. Now, little interesting fact. Again, this is not a modern-day satellite image of Jerusalem. Jerusalem today looks like a big, bustling, modern city. This is a reconstruction of first-century Jerusalem. Does somebody notice something unique in the middle of this imagery? Something that you think it might not belong there? The what?
Body of water.
Okay, there are bodies of water. There are some pools. We're going to talk about that. I'm going to go ahead and point it out. It's right in here. What does that look like? It is a Greek theater. New Testament Jerusalem was a product of Herod the Great's ambitions, dreams, and work. And he was through and through, though he claimed to be an adherent to the Jewish religion, he was through and through a Greco-Roman person. And yes, he had a Greek theater built right smack in the middle of it. So that's just a very interesting tidbit, because here's what I want you to see. Jerusalem in the New Testament is much more of a cosmopolitan city than it was in the days of David and Solomon. There were Greeks around, there were Romans around, but it is predominantly a Jewish city. But it is struggling to maintain that identity, and enters Jesus. So these rings here represent certain key locations, and we're going to start really where Jesus starts, and in a way toward the end of his time in Jerusalem, and that is the Mount of Olives. Now, recall last week that Jerusalem is the stage for the last events. Can you give me a little gain on the mic? Jerusalem is the stage for the last week of Jesus' life. However, before the last week of his life, what relationship did he have with Jerusalem?
Wept over.
Pardon?
Wept over.
Wept over. He does that when he comes in that last week. But through his lifetime, what relationship did he have with Jerusalem? Lord?
Where everything was intensified.
Okay. He had these forays into Jerusalem. He's taken there as a baby for the dedication. He comes back at 12 years of age. During his ministry, he would come there on feast days. And whenever he goes there, the controversies got more intense about him, right? But it's that last week that we're going to focus on tonight. So this is the view from the Mount of Olives. So you're standing on the Mount of Olives. Understand there is some, speculation here, but this is one of the most accurate programs that I've seen on this. I mean, I did some reading and I'm like, yeah, that's exactly how it's represented on this map. So you're standing there on the Mount of Olives, looking over the Kidron Valley at Jerusalem and specifically at the temple complex. Remember last week we said that Jerusalem is about 2,100 feet in elevation above sea level, but the mountains around Jerusalem are all higher. And so what did I say happened if you came into Jerusalem from north, south, east, or west? What was the experience? You crest over a mountain. You can't see Jerusalem. You crest over a mountain, and there it is. So there are higher mountains all the way. It's ringed by higher mountains. And this is Mount of Olives. See all those mountains even to the south? And so there was a dramatic experience when you finally crested over the mountain, and there was Jerusalem. And of course, they experienced that in the Old Testament as well. So let's go back here to the aerial view, and why not start at the temple? Because indeed, it is the focal point. Now, look what you see. Well, I'll make this point later, but I do want you to see how that the temple is surrounded by a complex. Think about all the events in the life of Jesus, and we're going to talk a little bit about the book of Acts today, the first few chapters. The events in the early chapters of Acts taking place at the temple. That didn't mean they went into the temple building. That meant that they were at the complex. Now look how large space that took. Herod is the guy that had this all built. He actually spends about 46 years completing this, and they were still working on it a little bit. They were still working on it some. But he spent a lot of money on this, and he basically doubled the footprint of the temple complex. So let's go to the temple entrance. Most people came into the temple from the north or from the south. However, we're going to stand at the eastern entrance. It faced the east. And so if you went into this first area, this is called the court of the Gentiles, which meant that Gentiles, that's not right. Come back here. I think I already was in the court of the Gentiles. Now, this is the court of the Gentiles, which meant that Jews and Gentiles could be in here. Look how big this is, and you'll see it later on. Remember how that the 3,000 who were converted on Pentecost, it says at the end of Acts 2 that they met in the temple daily? This is where they were gathering on these porches, these porticos, and it's a lot of space. Now, this is probably where the money changers would have been, and maybe some of those outside, but this would have been one of the areas where that would have been. Now, this is called the court of the women, the court of women, which meant that all Israelites, including females, could enter this. No Gentile could come in there. Jews had the right to kill any Gentile that came in there, according to the Roman authorities. And so this is where the Israelites would gather, including the women. This is where they would bring the treasury deposit, like the woman, the lady who gave the 2 mites. This is where she would have done that. If you go into the next ring, the next compound, this is called the court of Israel. And what that means is only Israelite men could come into this. And this is where the priests worked with the sacrifices. Now, not necessarily according to the plan laid out in the Old Testament, but there is evidence that they had an area where they staged the animals, and you know that because you see the blood. So this is where they would tie up the rams and the goats and things like that. And this is the, Joe's had enough of a ship going up and down, I'm sure. So this is the altar, the altar of burnt offering. They would lay the animals on there, and so this is what the priest would do. This area around that's called the court of the priests even. And so we're going to go up here on the steps and get just right there and turn around, and you can get a better look. And there's the altar, approximately what it would have been like. And again, this is some artist's rendition of this, but this is really based on a lot of archaeological evidence as well as textual evidence. This is the laver where they would go through the washings as they were going through the ceremonies. And are there any priests here that can go into the temple? All right, what's your answer, Christian? Yes. We're all priests, right? We're not cut off from the presence of God, right? So, let's go in. Everybody hold your breath. It's not, and I do this every time I go too far. Sorry. Okay. Sorry about that. I am really disoriented. Okay. I'll explain what this room is in a minute. It's not what you would expect it to be. Okay, let's go back out here. I'm so sorry. Okay, now, you can see the table of showbread, the golden lampstand, and then the altar of burnt incense, which is in front of the veil. And of course, what happened to the veil the day Jesus died? Right. Now, they don't have the ark in here. Best evidence is the Jews never rebuilt the ark because the ark, there was only one. And in the Babylonian invasion, they looted the temple. It's believed to be taken by the Babylonians and stored up with their treasures, and they didn't get it back. And so, best evidence we have, there was no ark in the most holy place. But they still believe the presence of God was there. That's according to priest tradition. So, let's go back out here. We went all the way to the Holy of Holies. And let's come back over here and go right here. First of all, this is the southeast corner looking over the temple courtyard. See how you can have Jesus there preaching to large crowds, and Peter preaching to large crowds, and the early Christians meeting there. When you think of the temple in the New Testament, don't think of a building. Think of a campus. It's a complex. You literally could put thousands of people there, and they try to get that to scale. Do you see the little people there? Now, if you look back over this way, note the mountains that are ringing this site. This is the Kidron Valley, and this is the Mount of Olives over here, and somewhere over here would have been the Garden of Gethsemane. Now, this is the Kidron Valley below. This is the highest point of the temple area, the temple, corner to the ground level, which would likely be the place where Jesus was tempted to throw himself down in the second temptation in Matthew. So it could have been some other place, but this definitely would have been the most dramatic one. And that's looking down. And that's, again, this is scale. And there you can see that theater a little better. Now let's go over to this corner. This is the southwest corner. Again, looking over the temple compound. Mount Olives. A lot of people coming up to the temple would have approached it from the south entrance. They had baths down here where they could do ritual cleansing. Probably some marketeers down there also. Now, remember last week we talked about lower city and upper city Jerusalem. Here's lower city. Here's upper city. Even by looking at this image, you might recall, what did we say about who lived where?
Lower class in the lower city.
Right. The average commoners lived in the lower city. The wealthier, more powerful people, including the chief priests, the aristocracy, and any Roman rulers that would have been in Jerusalem would have been up here. And you can see the buildings are bigger. And they have some evidence about this. And it's just, some of it just makes sense that they would have larger facilities and things like that. Now, this right here is Herod's palace. Herod the Great built a palace. It's right here. It was the base of operations for the Roman government. Herod's gone by this time. His kingdom's been broken up, and Jerusalem and Judea is under the authority of a Roman procurator or governor, and at the time of Jesus, it was Pilate. So whenever you read, there are two places possibly where Pilate and Jesus interacted with each other. One is Herod's palace. We don't know whether it was for sure it was Herod's palace, but it's one of the possibilities. Now, this is very unusual. Remember that Tyropian Valley? There's a ravine down in here. Look what they've done. They've built an entryway into the temple complex to make it easy to get in there. This is no speculation. They have found the base of this. And so they've concluded, they've fleshed it out based upon the archaeological site there that's been uncovered. Now let's go over here. We talked about this in the New Testament history class some weeks ago. This part of the temple complex is called the Fortress of Antonia. Herod the Great was buddy-buddy with Mark Antony, and this was in honor of Mark Antony. And this was the Roman garrison. Approximately 500 Roman soldiers were stationed in that fortress. Why do you think it was adjacent to the temple? Pardon?
In case of uprising.
Exactly. It's crowd control. And when does that actually come about in the book of Acts?
Paul was preaching.
Right. Paul is seized by a mob when he visits Jerusalem in Acts 20:21. The event takes place there. And the mob's about to kill him. Jewish people have turned against him. The Roman soldiers rush down and take him into protective custody. And as they're making their way to the fortress, he asks permission. He stops and he addresses the crowd and preaches to them in Acts 21. So let's go over there. It's some view over here at the Fortress of Antonio. That looks northward. And Herod really expanded the city. And again, you get an idea of what the temple complex would have looked like. And then looking back over the city, it is a vantage point that put the Roman authorities in a good place. The Fortress of Antonio is another base of operations for the governor. It's possible that Pilate interacted with Jesus at this fortress. And given the fact, think about it, that Pilate, especially in the Gospel of John, is interacting with the crowd. Who do you want me to release to you? Remember, there's a crowd there. That really lends evidence that it's here adjacent to the temple complex. But it's either Herod's palace or the fortress where he's trying Jesus. And we'll get out of here before we disturb that Roman soldier. All right, let's go back here to the top. Here's the view of the lower city down in here. This possibly is where the Last Supper took place. It would make sense the Last Supper took place somewhere in that lower city where the commoners lived. And so that's Herod's palace. Do you see these three towers? One tower was named after his friend, one was named after his brother, and one was named after his wife, Miriam, who was connected to the high priesthood by family, and she is one of the wives that he executed. So, but she got a tower. You can see the upper city there. Let's go back here, and I want to point out two things. Right here, this has been covered in archaeological digs. This is the pool of Bethesda. What happens here? John 5. That's right. Jesus heals the lame man. He takes up his pallet and walks. Stirs up a big controversy. See how close it is to the temple? And it literally had two pools with a walkway in between. They've uncovered that. Another pool is on the other end, down here. It's the pool of Siloam. What happened here? John 9. Healing of the blind man, and Jesus had him to go wash in the pool, and that healed him of his blindness. So this is another pool close to the lower city, would have been used by a lot of the commoners. Okay, I think that ends the tour. Any question? Who's got a question here? We'll look at something more closely. Oh, yeah, I meant to bring this up. What about Golgotha, and what about the burial? Everything points to the Gethsemane's over here around the Mount of Olives, over here on the east side, across the Kidron Valley. It actually says that in one of the Gospels. They go through the Kidron Valley to the Garden of Gethsemane. There are two traditional sites, and this shows you why these guys were really conservative on this. They don't even put this on this map. It's on your atlas on page 24. There are two traditional sites for the crucifixion and the burial of Jesus. The main one is right here. And it's not based on archaeology. It's not based on historical records. It's based on traditions of when pilgrims started building things there 400, 500, 600. The other location is it's possibly he was crucified here and buried nearby. But you can see that whether it's here or there, it's somewhere outside the wall of Jerusalem. It would make sense it would be on this side. And you can see that if he was tried by Pilate at the fortress of Antonia, that the pathway would have been this way, and that is the famous traditional path that people celebrate today for the Stations of the Cross and all that. But that's not located on here because there's not the evidence to sustain exactly where that took place, the crucifixion and the burial of Jesus. All right, any questions?
I remember reading somewhere that the temple complex, actually the court of the Gentiles, would hold about 6,000 people.
Yeah, I believe it. Yep. And then you got the court of Israel. I mean, you can pack a lot of people in that complex. A lot of people.
And there was no fire marshals back then.
No. Yeah. And you see how steep everything is. By the way, I want to show you this. We talked about how that wherever you're going to Jerusalem, you're going up and down. Remember that last week? Let me go back here. Jesus goes, the night he's betrayed and arrested, he goes somewhere in the lower city, across the Kidron Valley, over here. They come and get him. They bring him back across the Kidron Valley. And this is where somewhere in your map, in your atlas, identifies a traditional site where Caiaphas and Annas would have been trying him, the former and the current high priest. So it's up and down and up and down. And if you go right here, you really get a feel for it when you turn around, that wherever you're going, it's up and down. See those people? I mean, what's supposed to be people? And look at those steps. Look at this ravine here. This is that Tyropian Valley. And you can see why Herod built all those steps and so forth. All right, any other questions?
What was that rock-looking structure in the Holy of Holies in the temple?
It's just some kind of platform. I don't know what that was. I don't know why they portrayed it as a rock. That's interesting. You think it used to be like a flat platform waiting for the ark or something, but yeah, I don't know.
Did they think it was Mount Moriah, where Abraham?
The best evidence of Mount Moriah is just north. Mount Moriah is like in the suburbs of Jerusalem, the northern suburbs. It's like Weaverville to Asheville, okay? But the best evidence is that Moriah is right here, but it is in the vicinity. Now, I don't know about that. If they thought that was, that's a research point right there. What were they thinking of the Holy of Holies at this time when they didn't have the ark?
Is it that what the Muslims think, that where the Dome of the Rock is?
The Muslims have the Dome of the Rock right here, and the reason why the Muslims have the Dome of the Rock right there is that Muhammad, according to their teachings, Muhammad experienced a heavenly vision when he traveled up to Jerusalem and was caught up into heaven by a team of horses. Remind you of anything? And he had like a heavenly vision and came back. So there are three holy sites. Mecca, where he's from. Medina is where he lived and started preaching. And then Jerusalem. And he actually taught his followers to pray toward Jerusalem until the Jews in Medina kept rejecting him. And then he said, now pray toward Mecca. His first followers prayed toward Jerusalem. And then he put a stop to it.
It almost feels like in that most holy place where they didn't complete it. I got the impression that because they didn't have the Ark of the Covenant, they just didn't bother to complete it because they didn't have anything to put in it.
Left it raw.
Left it raw, yeah.
There was a lot of material built on the east face of the temple so that when the morning sun hit it, it illuminated it. That's facing the east. And so this was some structure right here.
No,
Really
where's
was.
the existing leftover piece of the temple? It's the mount, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the Wailing Wall is on the western side. The Wailing Wall is where you see Jewish Orthodox men go there and pray and stick prayers in the wall, and tourists visit there, and you see pictures of it, and it's got greenery growing out of the cracks. Quite sure that was the western part of the temple. And it's not much left, but it was the original wall from the Herodian temple. At the base of it. The temple itself, there was nothing left over. Matter of fact, this is lost on us a little bit. And actually, this had eluded me until some research recently. The Romans, destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD as predicted by Jesus. They leveled the temple area, the temple building. And they used the rocks for paving and things like that. I think it's 135 AD, early 2nd century, the Romans said, we're sick and tired of Jerusalem being this problem. Some Jews still live there. They came in and had a major building project and turned Jerusalem into a complete Greco-Roman city with streets laid out and temples and everything else. This is 135. So you talking about concluding Judaism. The Romans, they shut the door on it by the early 2nd century. And so that's why you have Jews dispersed everywhere again. And by the time you get into the Middle Ages and the modern era, Jews are living everywhere, even up in Europe. They've just migrated everywhere. Until the 20th century, and they start going back to Israel. Actually, late 19th century. All right, anything else?
Where would, we may not be able to tell, would it make sense that the sermon on Pentecost would have been in the lower city, if that's where the 12 may have been?
I thought about that even today, and it's not clear exactly where they are when it's going on, the preaching. And all the apostles preach, and Peter's sermon is highlighted. It does say at the end of Acts 2, like there in verse 41, and those who received his word were baptized, and 3,000 souls were added to them. And then verse 42, and they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine, fellowship, prayers. And then it says, and they were meeting in the temple daily. I think that's verse 43 or 4. So whether Pentecost happened in the temple complex or not, the first Christians started meeting there. And then you see in Acts 3, Peter and John going up there to pray, and they encounter the lame man and they heal him, and then they preach to a large crowd in Acts 3. So it's probably very possible that the Pentecost preaching was happening in the temple complex. It would accommodate that crowd, because 3,000 people obeyed the message, obeyed the gospel. But the text never indicates exactly where they are when they're preaching. But at the end of Acts 2, it indicates they're in the temple complex meeting. Because they were all Jewish people. I mean, that's where they were accustomed to going there. And they were finding great opportunities to preach there. They keep preaching there. Great questions. Anything else? Hey, sorry, Catherine, I didn't see you.
Just one thing to consider in that question would be that there were about 120 people assembled in an upper room. So this would be just a little poverty house.
Yeah, the Acts 1, when the apostles and the early believers, including Mary, assemble, and they pick Matthias by lots, that's 120 people. So, but I will say this, people in the first century, they were used to crowding in a lot more than we are. But it was no tiny little hut. You're exactly right. And they used rooftops a lot. And who knows exactly where they were at. But yeah, 120 people in Acts 1. And then it goes from 120 to 3,000 by the end of chapter 2. All right, anything else? Oh, I was going to say that virtual New Testament. Virtual New Testament. It's cool. It really is. Ken and I played with it the other day here. Make sure it works.
I think they actually have some automated tours of different events, if I remember right.
Okay. I haven't seen those, but
I think it was this one. It looked
okay.
familiar, but I have to track it down again.
This one's not too old, I don't think. So, all right. Anything else? Y'all have had great questions.
Solomon's portico, do
Good question. It's on one of these sides. I can't remember whether it's north or south. The map on page 24, does it indicate which one's Solomon's porch?
I wanna say it was the south side, like when you were.
Right here?
Yeah, from that corner there.
That right there. That's the south side.
This picture here says the royal porch. Would that be Solomon's portico? Or
I don't know. Maybe. Ben Solomon.
I'm not entirely certain, but I think what you're seeing, the edge of there might have been it on the, right side of the screen.
Yes. This portico or a covered porch area
I
is
was talking the foreground.
right here.
Yeah, that's,
Yeah.
that whole side of it, I think may have been it, I'm not sure.
It's I think either the north or the south side, but there is a portico, a covered porch all the way around the perimeter. It did occasionally rain there. Not often, but it did. Jerusalem could double in size. There is some controversy about how big Jerusalem was at this time. The best evidence I've seen is roughly half the size of Asheville, 40 to 50,000. But that population could increase by 50 to 100% on a feast day, on a feast period, where they would come in from everywhere, like Pentecost or the Passover. In the days of David, it's estimated of 10 to 20,000 only. Lord, you have a question?
Yeah, where were the springs? Where did they get their water source? I mean, is it?
Yeah, I mean, the springs go all the way back to David's time. Remember, the Jebusites had a spring, and they used it to penetrate the city. Archaeologically, the only ones they have verified is this one here in the north, the Pool of Bethesda, and the Pool of Siloam in the south. There are some springs. The Gihon Spring, that's the old spring. The Gihon Spring. I'm not sure where that's at. My guess is it's somewhere in the Tyropian Valley. Because think about it, springs are always in a low place.
It's on the eastern side, and that's where Hezekiah's tunnel comes from.
Right over in here somewhere.
No, off on the side of the wall.
Well, here's the thing. In David and Solomon's day, it's basically, this is the city. This is the city.
So when Hezekiah was protecting from Sennacherib, he built the tunnel.
Right.
So that the water would come inside the city.
Right.
And empty into the pool of Bethesda, Siloam, so that it would, instead of being the Gihon spring outside the wall, he walled it off.
Inside, yeah.
And
All right.
all the water inside.
Yeah, I've been so focused on New Testament, but that's a great question. It's got to be somewhere here because everything on this side of the Tyropian Valley is New Testament era. It's between the Testament and New Testament era expansion. So again, it's a city of 10 to 20,000 in the days of David and Solomon. Not very many. But again, look where it's at. Middle of nowhere up in the mountains. Okay.
Lower section is the part that Hezekiah.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, it is on this map that I gave you that we're not using because we're out of time?
The lower right, outside the wall.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the old city. This is the old city right here. So your map, the big map, legal size sheet you've got on your table is indicating it's right in here near the Kidron Valley. Again, springs are in low places typically. So, okay. Any questions? Okay, Ray, you can hit the lights, please. Thank you very much. And we don't have time for that next activity. That just took so long. So, but you were ready to sit and listen for a while after all that flour and salt. You were ready to. Okay, any other questions? I'm just going to take a couple of questions and then we'll break early. Any questions? I want to say it's Luke. Yeah, when they go from the upper room in the Passover feast to Gethsemane, it says they crossed the Kidron. Is it Luke?
It's one of the crucifixion
I don't think it's in John's gospel. I think it's.
Oh, John 18.
Well, it is in John's gospel. John 18. Oh, okay. John 18 what?
1.
Okay. It is in John's gospel. That's not mentioned in the other three, but the others mention he's in the city, and then it says he goes to the Mount of Olives. Well, guess what? You have to cross Kidron.
David crossed the Kidron to go to Mount of Olives after Ahithophel actually betrayed him.
Oh, on the run out.
Similar to
On the run out. Yes, that is.
Yes,
When he's
he was talking about Judas, you know.
when Absalom's running him out of town. Yeah, yeah. Okay. It's a very different city in the New Testament period. It's less Jewish, but still predominantly Jewish. And it's bigger. A lot bigger. So, and that's all due to Herod. Anything else? Okay, thank you all very much. We can hit the pews and then we'll proceed with the talk.
So our short talk weaves together into what we just looked at a little while ago. If you'd like to turn to Matthew chapter 23. Matthew chapter 23. The last few verses of this chapter, your Bible may label them different things. It may be called the Lament over Jerusalem. It may be called the Future of Jerusalem. But they're very interesting verses because they're very different from the verses before it and the verses after. At this point in the book of Matthew, we're coming close to the end of Jesus' ministry, essentially. And chapter 23 is where he lays into the Pharisees. The location was what we just looked at in Matthew 21, I think it is, and in Matthew 24, verse 1, it talks about Jesus entering the temple area. And verse 1 of chapter 24, it talks about him leaving the temple area. And when we saw those pictures today, Philip, I understand why Jesus taught in Galilee. There's a lot of room There's a lot of difficulty, I'll bet, joining together with a lot of people on hillsides or pulling a boat away, but that's beside the point. Let's read these passages. 37, 38, and 39 are the closing verses of 23. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together, the way a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were unwilling. Behold, your house is being left to you desolate. For I say to you, from now on you shall not see me until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Those are very different. Let's look just briefly at some of the verses just before that, which is the concluding of Jesus confronting and condemning the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the other. He condemns far more than them. He condemns really the whole, the officials of Jerusalem. From the time of Jerusalem, I think, really means Israel to a great extent. That city really represents the nation and the leaders of the nation. But reading verse 34, 35, and 36, therefore, behold, I'm sending you prophets and wise men and scribes. Some of them you will kill and crucify, and some of them you'll scourge in your synagogues and persecute from city to city, that upon you may fall the guilt of all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Truly I say to you, all these things shall come upon this generation. Chapter 24 is going to go into the destruction of the temple. But Jesus has given the justification for why the temple is going to be destroyed here. It's really a conclusion. It's coming to the end of Jesus' ministry. And when it's mentioned in verse 35, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, I read that Abel, of course, is in the book of Genesis. The story of Zechariah is found in 2nd Chronicle. And Joash the king incited him to be stoned because he was preaching, sent by God to preach and teach about the idolatry that was taking place at that time. Zechariah is found in 2nd Chronicles. In the Hebrew Bible, 2nd Chronicles is the last book of the Hebrew Bible. And from Abel to Zechariah, meaning symbolically, any man of God basically would be murdered, and the way that they were treated basically is the reason for the judgment that would come upon. But and the word hen is used here, and that's a symbolism that Jesus uses in many other places, or in Psalms, in the Old Testament is used about in the shadow of your wings. And Jesus, it's an appeal. It's an appeal of his love. And these are things that are we can learn from ourselves. And you were unwilling. And he's talking much more gently in these 3 verses. And his disappointment and his sorrow is just a counterbalance to the things that came before this and the things that came after this. And it gives him no pleasure. You can tell by what he's saying that he's got to pronounce judgment on the ones he came to save. In verse 38, he says, behold, your house is being left to you desolate. We know what that house refers to. It could mean all of Israel, but in the context, in verse 2, when he leaves the temple of chapter 24, he says, do you not see all these things? Truly I say to you, not one stone here shall be left upon another, which will not be torn down. But the reference to the temple here does mean more than just that physical temple. He was willing to teach. They rejected him. And the house is being left desolate would indicate the withdrawal of God, basically. And the withdrawal of God's presence from them. He came to do what he's talking about, like watching over and caring for his nation. He was there to be there for that reason, but they refused to accept him. And the consequence would be the house would be desolate. It's not the physical condition of the temple, but and also the word your in verse 38. He says, your house is being left you desolate. Your house. That's not my house. It's going to be their house that is now empty, basically. And that's really signified also by chapter 24, verse 1. And Jesus came out from the temple. And we're told that in the same way that God's presence would go out from the temple. And this temple's always been a symbol of God's relationship with his people. And when that relationship is broken, the temple's abandoned, basically. And the temple is of no meaning whatsoever. And the last verse, for now I say to you, from now on you shall not see me until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. These three verses point to, the conclusion of his ministry on earth. This is the last record of him speaking to crowds at all. From this point on, we know the latter part of Matthew is him speaking to his disciples, and the conclusion of his life and his crucifixion and resurrection. And the phrase that's quoted here, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, same phrase that was recorded in Matthew chapter 21, I believe, verse 9, when Jesus entered into Jerusalem. Hosanna to God. And that same phrase was used. And they would not see him again. If they see him again, it'll be on different terms. There's principles that are taught here. Anything Jesus says is going to be timeless principles that we can learn from. One is God's appeal. It's always going to be the same. It's an appeal of love. Jesus doesn't force his entry. He came for the purpose of the redemption, first of the people that were God's special people. And his hands are always outstretched to us as they were to them. And men have the huge responsibility of being able to accept or to refuse that invitation. And God showed his patience. Even though Israel killed the prophets and stoned God's messengers consistently through their history, he didn't cast them off. He in the end still sent his son. And you see also like a legal term, the deliberations that's going on of man in his sin. And they had an opportunity to look on Christ and his appeal and his ministry as majestic and beautiful as it was. And they refused him. And I love this quote. It says, there's no handle on the doors of our heart on the outside to pull them open. And he won't do that. They've got to be open from the inside. And the last thing this little 3-verse section shows are the consequences of rejection of Christ. It's going to be about 40 years later, as Philip was referring to, leveled. The nation of Israel, and at other point, truly they were destroyed and scattered. And this short little passage just shows the pain of our Lord when he's done all that he did, and still they did not accept him. And tonight, if anyone wants to accept God, because you know his appeal, you know his patience, and you see the love that he has for us in what he's done by sending his son, Zachary will lead a song. And if anyone would like to respond to the invitation, you can do so as we stand and sing.
Lean on, O cloud of presence, the Exodus is come. In wilderness and desert, our tribe shall make its home. Our bondage left behind us to hold within us grow. We seek the land of promise, where milk and honey flow. Lean on, O fiery pillar, we follow yet with fears, but we shall come rejoicing, though joy be born of tears. We are not lost, O wandering, for by your light we come, and we are still God's people. The journey is our home. Lean on, O God of freedom, and guide us on our way, and help us trust the promise through struggle and delay. We pray our sons and daughters may journey to that land where justice dwells with mercy, and love is lost in land.
Thank you, Zachary. Thank you, Ray. You know, it's work to take texts we're reading right now sometimes, and I appreciate the men who do that. You don't have to, but you could just tell the effort they put in that to try to link what we're doing in our congregational readings. And so thank you, Ray, for those many good points. Several items here. First of all, again, this Sunday afternoon, first of all, at 4 o'clock, we have scheduled a meeting for the ladies interested in preparing a baby class to start up. If you're interested in helping prepare or to help in the class as like assistant or to teach, this meeting is for you, and we've had some emails about that in the last several weeks. So that meeting's at 4 o'clock, and Earl and I are going to meet with the ladies and Les, because Les is the deacon connected to the Bible class organization. And then the three of us men are going to leave that meeting after about 25 minutes, and the ladies are going to keep meeting. And then at 4:30, we have the men's meeting, which is scheduled. We have quarterly men's meetings. And so this is the time for the next men's meeting. And as indicated by a recent email, this input meeting is a lot about worship assemblies and some things we want to go over regarding that, as well as your input on worship assemblies and anything as we have time. So men's meeting 4:30 this Sunday afternoon. So several of our number that we need to be updated about. Sherman Young came home last Friday, as you know. He is continuing to have tests, and bless their hearts, he had a test today, and the outcome was he needed another test. He's got to go back Friday, but he is home. He's been home since Friday. He's not eating well. He's not feeling well, and he is still really struggling. Jim Metcalf, as you know, had the episode last Friday of a couple of strokes, and he spent several days in the VA hospital, came home this afternoon. He is getting stronger and is feeling better. However, as a result of the stroke, he has still not recovered his sight in his right eye, and it's black. It's not even foggy, he said. So he has completely lost that sight. And but his attitude's really good, and Maxine's. And I tell you, if you're feeling discouraged, talk to Jim, Maxine, or Connie, and you won't feel that way because they've got such great attitudes. Now Sherman, he's not much up to talk right now. He is so weak. But if you talk with those folks, with all they're going through, they've just got a great attitude. And also, more is on the way, unfortunately. Sandy Case has her knee surgery Monday. So we want to be praying for Sandy's surgery to go well and her recovery also. Most of you know who Scott Garrigan is, who's been visiting with us since last fall. A lot of you have really befriended Scott and interacted with him a lot and encouraged him. And Scott and I have been studying for months, extensive studying. And he has made a lot of spiritual progress, and he is still journeying, okay? His wife, as a lot of you know, she has a lot of health problems, mostly because of rheumatoid arthritis, a very severe case. They had to go down to Duke for a procedure on her foot, and it went well today. It was a fairly simple procedure, but the recovery time is very long. She's not going to be able to walk on that foot for weeks. And so this is a really good time to reach out to them. I have their physical address, and so I will send that out in an email and also try to post it on the board back there. But I meant to do that this afternoon. But I have their physical address if you want to drop them a line. But they were supposed to be headed back this evening from that procedure. The procedure was not that bad, but it's the recovery. And so let's keep in mind Scott and Melissa and see what we can do to encourage them. So thank you so much for your pickup every time. And we need to put everything back up. But we need 2 large tables in this big classroom. So when we're packing up, can we move maybe these 2 tables over to the big classroom and then all the blue padded chairs over there? Unless the men want to sit in the metal chairs. Which would you prefer? So we'll get the blue chairs and put them over there. All right, anything else that we need to note? Scott, you get something? Okay. Les is going to close this with a prayer. Thank you.
Dear Lord, we are so grateful for the time that we've been able to spend together and learn more about Jerusalem and about how Jesus interacted with the people of his day, and to the end that we may be able to be more like him and grow to love you even more and understand the context in which applies also to us in so many ways. So we thank you for making us lively stones in your temple that you're building as the church, and that you inhabit that temple and dwell with us. So we're thankful for each one here. Pray that you be with our visitors this evening and see them safely as they travel. Be with Melissa, Scott's wife, and pray that you bless each of them. Help Scott to continue to increase in his knowledge of your word. Be with Sandy Case as she goes into surgery, and we pray that the outcome would be a good one, and that it would help her. And be also with Jim, be with Sherman, and many others that need your special care and healing, and help us to be thankful when we're able to gather around as we have this evening, that we have health and strength of body and mind and spirit, that we're able to glorify you and come closer to in our relationship with our Creator. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.